I can have your attention. My name is Jay Stewart. I'm the Director of Programs at the Humanities Council of DC, otherwise known as Humanities. I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight for our latest Humanity, part of the What is Your DC series. The topic for tonight is Statehood of the New Columbia. I'd like to start out by thanking our host, the Anacostia Arts Center. I'd like to thank Camilo Kashaka for her patience in helping putting this together. I'd also like to thank Stephen Cole, our videographer in the back. I'd like to thank members of the staff who are here tonight, starting with our Executive Director, George Ford Austin, seated there in the back. To the left, my right, I'd like to recognize Agatha Tomasi, our Director of Fundraising and Louis Hicks, our Director of Grants and Special Projects. And somewhere is Jasper. He stepped back out. So Jasper Collier and Stephanie Scott are also here tonight. HumanitiesDC is an independent, nonprofit affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, the federal agency in charge of supporting the humanities throughout the United States. HumanitiesDC is an essential part of the district's effort to provide quality humanities-related programs that preserve Washington's cultural legacy and promote civic engagement in every neighborhood in DC. In 2017, HumanitiesDC is exploring the topic, what is your DC? Last year, we reviewed the 225-year history of the District of Columbia. This year, we are anchored firmly in the present-day concerns of the DC residents. Our topics, which may be found on our website, range from graffiti found along the DC Metro to DC government programs geared toward assisting the homeless. Our hope is to help the people of DC to determine how their surroundings shape their concept of a shared municipal culture, and to recognize how their own individual daily decisions reshape that context in new and unique ways. Today's topic, as I said, is Statehood New Columbia. Here today to discuss the topic is a panel of experts in the field. First, I'd like to recognize one of our elected senators, Michael Brown. I'd also like to recognize the city historian of the District of Columbia, Dr. Jeanette Hosmer-Harris. I'd like to recognize Mr. Eugene Hammond from the executive from the mayor's office. And finally, our moderator tonight, Dr. Cherie Ward. So I think we've got a few of the students. So Dr. Ward, I turn things over to you.
Okay, good evening and welcome everybody. We're here to have a great time. Are you here to have a great time? Yes. We're not only here to learn something and have a meaningful discussion about statehood and the New Columbia. Once we have 5-minute presentations from each of our panelists, then we will open the floor to you, our community and our guests, to add your comments and ask questions to make this discussion more meaningful. So I'm going to start first with the Senator, Mr. Brown. Please start with your presentation.
Well, thanks so much, Doctor. Obviously, if you want the big applause, you got to give out grade. But it's an honor to be here and with this great panel. And I want to thank all you guys for showing up. And before I start about statehood, I just got to put in a personal plug for community colleges. I started at a community college. I was a high school dropout. My parents died when I was 15 years old. I thought I knew everything there was to know. Then I went to college and found out I didn't know a damn thing. And I just want to encourage all of you guys to keep on the path that you've already started on. I have 3 degrees. The most important one to me, the most precious one, is my Associate of Arts degree, because that was the first one I got. My brother is just retired as president of a college. He also started at the same community college I did and ended up with a doctorate in education from Vanderbilt. So you can start here and you can go anywhere, and I encourage you to stay on the path. We're here tonight to talk about DC statehood. This is something that everybody in Washington, D.C. should know about, because we're the only jurisdiction in the world, the only democracy in the world that denies the residents of its capital city the same rights that every other citizen has. We pay federal income taxes. We pay the highest federal income taxes in America per capita. We serve in the armed forces at higher than the national average. There have been 32 district residents who have received the Congressional Medal of Honor, including the guy that wrote the national anthem, Francis Scott Key, and the man that wrote TAPS, General Butterworth, who was a Congressional Medal of Honor recipient during the Civil War. So I like to say, every time the flag goes up or comes down, there's a Washingtonian involved. But unfortunately, when the flag flies over the Capitol or over the White House, they forget all about us because we don't have a voice. I'm elected like every other United States senator. I got 207,000 votes in the last election. I serve a 6-year term, but I have no say in Congress. I get to go and press my nose up against the glass and ask them to be nice to us. And it's time that we stop asking for these people to be nice to us. This is our birthright, to have the same rights as every other American citizen. But to get that, we need to get involved. I've learned a lot of things in this job, but I've learned nothing more important than what Frederick Douglass, who lived right down the street, said, which is that power concedes nothing without a demand. Well, when 100 people show up in front of the White House, that's not a demand. When 100,000 of us show up in front of the White House, that's a demand. There's a guy in town named Johnny Barnes, who used to be the chief of staff for our first representative in Congress, our first delegate, well, not our first, but our first in modern times, Walter Fauntleroy. And he likes to tell this story about how they pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed to make Martin Luther King's birthday a holiday. And there was no interest in making Dr. King's, in Congress, making Dr. King's birthday a holiday until Stevie Wonder wrote a song about it, came out on the Capitol lawn, and 50,000 people showed up to hear the song. The next day, Johnny says, there were a handful of a whole group of members of Congress that wanted to put in a bill to make his birthday a national holiday, and as we all know, with the exception of Arizona, it is a national holiday. So this is what we need to do. We need to motivate people locally and motivate people nationally to support us, because we can't bestow statehood upon ourselves. We need people throughout the country to do this. One of our problems here is that we fund this anemically. We don't put much money into it. The mayor has just announced that she's going to put $1 million into a campaign, a nationwide campaign. But I can tell you, nationwide campaigns to change the Constitution cost a lot more than that. The Equal Rights Amendment costs hundreds of millions of dollars, and it still hasn't been ratified. So we need to put some money into this. We need to get people out locally to stand behind it. And I'm going to turn this over to my eminently qualified fellow panelists, and I hope you'll have some questions for me. Thanks so much for inviting me. Let me recognize my wife, who's my official bride. She's the one to make sure I show up everywhere.
Yeah, you definitely had to acknowledge her, because behind every good man is a greater woman. Okay, our next panelist coming up is Dr. Janet Harris, or Jeanette Harris. Okay, what we're
It's so good to see all of you here this evening. And I guess, you know, old classroom professors don't need a mic. But anyway, I just want to talk a little bit about the beginning of statehood. But I first want to thank Joy Austin and the Evangelist Council for bringing this forum together so we can share this idea. Let's give her a round of applause. I think I better first acknowledge my husband of 54 years. I think DC statehood is one of the most important topics that face us in this century, because we have been denied our civil rights, our human rights, our right to be full citizens. Back in 225 years ago, during the founding of Washington, that was a saying, that Washington will never get statehood. And I wondered why. And then as an African-American professor at UDC, I began to research why do people say we won't get statehood? And I saw it in the books, I saw it in pamphlets, I saw it in magazines. And then I found the answer that they were saying that there are four, you call them 4 twos, T-O-O, 4 twos. And there's a feeling during the very beginning of this country that DC wouldn't get the statehood because it was too liberal, too democratic, too urban, and too black. What a travesty. But that was the belief, and it's still the belief in the minds of many. But we're going to make that belief, we're going to kill that belief and change the whole idea of who we are and what we ought to be. When did statehood start? The whole movement started. It started in 1980. It started, the plan was, there was a call for district voters to come together and elect 45 delegates to write a constitution. And they called for a statehood constitutional convention. That was the very first. The 45 delegates were 5 from each of the 8 wards. And then there were 5 at large. There were persons like Hilda Mason, David Clark, James Coates, Teresa Jones, throughout the city, Jane Icahn, Robert Bruning. The president of the Statehood Constitutional Convention was Charles Cassell. The first vice president was James Baldwin from Ward 7. Cassell was from Ward 3. And the second vice president was Janet Hostin Harris from Ward 4. So as drafters of this Constitution, we were given a mandate that in I think it was 45 days, we must write a Constitution. We lived this process for those days. It was the most organized activity I had been involved in. We drafted this Constitution, which began with a preamble to the Constitution and ended with the transition of power. And within those 2 areas, we dealt with housing and education and public safety and public housing and executive, judicial, and legislative branches of government. We drafted all of those articles, 18 articles of that Constitution. That Constitution was voted on by the citizens of the District of Columbia as they voted the delegates in office. And I want you to know that 60% of the district residents approved that Constitution. And that was one of the most important documents, and we coined the term New Columbia. I have before me one of the original copies of the Constitution of the state of New Columbia. And so there are many around, but they're hard to find. After 3 months of deliberation, we became known as the first drafters of the first statehood constitution for the District of Columbia. And so that set us on the road to working on bringing full statehood to the District of Columbia. Now there have been many movements. Marion Barry submitted our first constitution to Congress, and it was carried by Walter Fauntroy, our delegate in 1983, and asked for the first hearing on the Constitution in 1984. So we have had several petitions and several going to Congress to get them to support statehood for the District of Columbia, but none has passed to this date.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. So see how interesting this conversation is growing? Well, as you listen to our final presenter, I hope that you are thinking of wonderful questions and comments so we can keep the conversation going. And now for our final panelist, Mr. Eugene Kinlow.
There we go. All right, well, one, I just want to thank the organizers for having this fabulous event at this fabulous location. So let's just give Joy and Jay a round of applause. Now, there's so many things I can say, but one, having to go behind Mike and Dr. Harris is a hard thing because they represent the movement in terms of activism and advocacy. with Mike and history, because that's very important as we have to tell our story. And telling our story is a difficult thing here in Washington, D.C. because it's an issue that people don't talk about. You don't wear it on your sleeve each and every day. This is an issue, it's a lot like this place here. How many people have been here before? Okay, so 1 or 2 people have been here before, but if you don't know about it, you can't go there. So for statehood, when you talk about statehood and you go across the country, you know, 80, it's probably close to 90% of Americans do not know that we do not have the rights that other Americans have. Many people believe because we are in Washington, D.C., and we're closer to the White House, and we're closer to Congress, that we probably have more power than they do out in the States. But the fact of the matter is that we have less. We've got no member of Congress, and we've got no senators. So many people across the country, when they see our tags, they say taxation without representation, they think it's just history. Oh, we're just reflecting back on history. But for us, it is a living testament to our disenfranchisement. So I'm just going to tell you just a little bit about me. This issue has been with me pretty much so my whole life. But the first thing I have to do is honor my alma mater, UDC.
Yay!
I'm a graduate of the university. And in fact, I graduated and stayed active. I was on the board of trustees for a number of years, probably about 10 years ago, about 4 years ago. Just very active. And while we were there, we decided that we were going to build a community college because we needed one. Here in Washington, D.C., we were the only major city without a community college, so it was important to make sure that we provided that tool for each and every person to have access to higher education. So I'm glad to see that you have your class here from the University of District of Columbia Community College, and there are great things that you're going to do. And here, Dr. Harris will tell you about her history and her ability, her history, not just in understanding history, but her history with the University of the District of Columbia and the great legacy that it has in producing thinkers and people who work on behalf of the city. So I said I was going to talk about a little bit about my entry point in this issue, in a little bit. One, I'm from Washington, D.C. I'm born here, born and bred right here on Ward 8. Went to a little school called Ballou. Anybody heard of Ballou High School? I went to Hart. So this is my community. I'm further down Martin King Avenue in a community called Bellevue. But when I was a young man, I wasn't a young man, I was a kid. I remember my dad dressing up like a Native American. And I thought that was cool, because you know, we don't really see Native Americans with the headdress on this side of the country. And he had boxes that said T on them. And he was active in the movement way back in the early 60s, throwing boxes in the river to demonstrate taxation without representation. Now in Washington, D.C., there are a lot of people who come here from elsewhere. And it's those people who come here, they feel that almost immediately. Wherever you're from, North Carolina, New York, wherever, you get to Washington, D.C., and they tell you that you don't have a member of Congress, or you have one but they can't vote, and that you have no senators, and maybe you'll figure it out by and by. Well, that's right there is a starting point for this disenchantment with the political system, and provides for an opportunity for us moving forward. So I just want to say, I know we're going to ask a lot of questions. I work for the mayor's office. I am her director of federal and regional affairs, and we staff the New Columbia Statehood Commission, of which Senator Brown is a part of. But prior to that, I spent about 9 years with a little organization called DC Vote. And at DC Vote, we were fighting for full democracy of America's residents right here in DC. We fought for things including budget autonomy, legislative autonomy, fighting for voting rights. And we did quite a few things, and all of those things have failed. We thought we would work on the smaller things and work to the bigger things, but where we are right now at this point in time is statehood. And I think there's a tremendous amount of energy around that, and we're going to continue to work, and I'm going to need your help to get there. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute.
Okay, thank you. And now, the floor is open to you, our guests and community here, to join in the discussion. So starting off, does anyone have a question or comment?
I've got a question.
Okay.
I'm on the panel, but I can ask a question.
You certainly can.
Okay, so the question is, well, why do we have this candy? And what's this candy about? I know, we're passing out the candy. Have you read the candy? I know it's tasty and it's a snack. What does it say?
One vote counts.
Well, all right, so it says, some say add a star,
Our vote counts.
our vote counts, our vote matters, right? What else does it say? DC statehood. So it's candy, but it's also a message. And I'm happy to say that about last year, it was a very political year, right? There were two conventions. There was the Democratic convention in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection. That's what they say. And it was also a GOP convention, a Republican convention in Cleveland. Well, we went to both conventions, and Senator Brown, he was there as well, and a number of other active citizens were there. We made sure that delegates and elected officials found out about our disenfranchisement. This was just one way, just to kind of to begin the conversation, because they said, well, why are you passing out candy? What's this candy about? Well, it was an opportunity to engage people, and again, that's the process that we're in. If people don't know about our issue, they can't help us. So the first rule is, the first job is, we gotta let them know.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments from the floor at this time?
I just
Okay.
wanted to maybe ask if you could talk.
Stand up, please, say your name.
Sure. My name's Marty. I live here in DC. I'm just curious if you can talk a little more about the communication strategy going forward now that we have DC residents voting in favor of statehood. You talked about how we need to get the message out. So what is the plan for educating the rest of the country and also lobbying on the Hill?
Well, I'm gonna start, then I'm gonna turn it over to.
So I'd like each of the panelists to address that.
Yes, okay.
Start with Mr. Kendall.
Well, one, the mayor just admitted, and she announced last week in her State of the District address that she's going to put money into this issue. Now, it's maybe not a tremendous amount of money, but it's $1 million, and I call it a down payment on statehood. Surely we're going to have, it's going to be probably a multi-year effort that's going to take a lot of resources. Governments generally don't fund movements like this. So the energy, the real energy and the real resources that come from a movement will have to come from the people, the citizens, the people who are affected by not having a vote in the House and the Senate. And it's going to have to come from the business community, the civic community to make that happen. So the mayor presented her budget to the DC City Council today. The almost $1 million includes money that will be for a director, somebody to run this program within the district government. I think the salary is probably less than $90,000 or something like that. And the bulk of the money, about 800 some odd thousand, will go to a diverse campaign that is in part an education campaign. One, we're going to have to do some focus groups. We're going to have to do some polling. We're going to have to figure out what messages work to people out in the states. Because if we go out there and we just say, well, we want statehood, will that work for people in California or other places? Some places might say, well, look, California is big enough to be 5 states. Well, why should you be a state because you're this big? So we're going to have to create messages that work. Now, in fact, DC, we have got a population bigger than 2 states, Wyoming and Vermont. But now that works in other populations, but it won't work for all. So we've got to create custom strategies, outreach strategies, messaging, polling, so that we can go in with the right language. Because when you go in neighborhoods and when you go to different countries, you got to be able to speak that language. So what we're trying to do is attempt to have that language set before we go in. I think what we're going to do also is we're going to make an investment in people. We're going to make sure that we're probably going to hire people who are from some of those communities. It's very difficult, and you see it probably in your own neighborhoods, when you got somebody who's from outside of your neighborhood and is coming and saying, this is what you need, the first question you ask them is, but are you from here? And then you might turn them off. We're probably going to have to engage some people who are part of those states that we're going to target to be a part of that program. And third or fourth, we're going to make sure that we've got to be able to reach people in new and inventive ways. We've got a convention center here that has millions of people who use that each and every year. But do they know about our issue? No. So we've got to make it easy for them to know about our issue. So when you go down to the Walter Washington Convention, there should be a kiosk there, an interactive kiosk, and one that is staffed, that provides for material, that provides for electronic engagement, perhaps some tests. so that they will know about our issues. But additionally, there are many conventions around the country, and that some may be NAACP, some for the doctors, some for the social workers. Well, guess what? We need to be about our business and have a traveling road show and join those conventions and be on the road and share information out in the streets as well. So those are just part of the strategies, and the mayor will reveal a few more of those details as soon as probably tomorrow. Tomorrow, the city will celebrate DC Emancipation Day. And, you know, DC Emancipation Day is very important here in Washington, D.C. It is our only local holiday. DC Emancipation Day, normally it will be on April 16th, but this year, because April 16th is Easter, we'll use another day. But we use this day to highlight our disenfranchisement, and the mayor will reveal some more of these details at that breakfast tomorrow morning.
Okay, Dr. Harris, would you like to weigh in?
Yes, I'd like to echo Mr. Kinlow, but let me say they're taking a page out of 1982, our Constitution. We focused on education. We must educate the public. They must understand what statehood is and how it can benefit them. I think that there ought to be a part of the curriculum in every school in the district that talks about statehood. Because once the children learn about it, the parents learn about it. I think we ought to have a team of, we used to do this, a team of persons who would go to conventions. We should go to every governor's convention, every mayor's convention, of course, every political convention. Carry our material, we used to do this, lobby at those conventions. That's important, because we have to do it two fronts, our own local front and then abroad. So I think that we really need to put that team together, and we need to move on that in addition to what Mr. Kendall has just said.
Okay, Senator Brown.
That's a great question. And let me tell you that this is an area that I have a little bit of a disagreement with Mr. Kimball. We don't have a plan. We do have a plan. The plan is called the Tennessee Plan. The Tennessee Plan has worked every time it's been used. 7 times it's been used. Alaska used the Tennessee Plan. Tennessee obviously used it. California, Michigan. Many states have entered the union with the Tennessee Plan. In the District of Columbia, we don't support the Tennessee Plan. We stand out there and we talk about it. We wave it like a flag. Puerto Rico is about to institute the Tennessee Plan, and they are going to have a plebiscite election on June 11th, where they intend to elect senators and representatives and send them to Washington to lobby. Now, this has always worked, but we don't support our senators and representatives here in Washington, D.C. My entire budget for next year is $79,000. That's less than the one position that they're going to create in the mayor's office for a new person to coordinate this activity. We need to stand up and support the people that do the work in this city to make this happen and get a strategy together that will actually reach out to America. To put $800,000 into this is not enough money. It's not going to change it. We do many of the things that Eugene already outlined. I have a nationwide radio show that's been on the air for 3 years and has 8,000 listeners a month where we talk about statehood. I have a website that actually, as Dr. Harris points out, it's aimed at high school students to teach them how they can use the situation here in Washington to understand how the country was created. But these are all small steps. What we're doing basically is we're hurling rocks at the sun. This is a big problem. We're faced with fighting the 535 smartest, meanest people on the planet who have deprived us of our rights for more than 200 years. The Constitution does not take the rights away from the people of the District of Columbia. It was Congress that did that. And they send us up there with no tools and no support, and that's a problem.
I'd like to throw a question out to the panel. Now my students are learning about persuasion and questions of policy. And in questions of policy, the panel has discussed the need, the plan, and some of the alternatives that could happen. Where do you think the burden of proof lies when it comes to a question of policy statement?
Well, I mean, I think the prima facie evidence, or on the face of it, the evidence, is that the country was founded on the principle that you cannot tax people and then not allow them to have a voice in their own government. So this is against every principle of democracy on which the country was founded. But, you know, as they say, that and $1.95 will get you a couple of Starbucks coffee. So you've got to put something in it for people. And I think the thing that you need to put in it for everybody else in America is, you know, Dr. King said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So when you're willing to take the rights away from any group of people, your rights may be the next group that, you know, you may be the next group to lose your rights. So I think we need to put something in it for people. And this is a problem that we have all the time. We go to California and we say, we don't have the same rights you do. And everybody in California says, that's terrible. But they don't have a dog in the fight. The people in California don't feel our pain. During the Civil Rights Movement, when people in Mississippi and Alabama were having fire hoses turned on them and German Shepherds sicked on them, every black person in America could feel that pain. They all knew it. But nobody else has our pain. Nobody else lacks representation. So they really don't feel what we're going through. And we got to find a way to make them feel it.
Okay, Dr. Harris, would you like to make a point, and then Mr. Kinlow?
I think I'm going to yield to Mr. Kinlow since he's in the policy office.
Okay.
But I just want to say that what Mr. Brown has just stated is true. We need to create something out of this world around statehood that people will remember. And when they see it, when you see a red Coca-Cola bottle, you know that's Coke. Anywhere you go. So we need to create something that speaks to statehood, that is recognizable all around the globe. And we fight for what that symbol is. And we ought to have one day where, it could be the Emancipation Day, where everybody comes out in a statehood t-shirt. And whatever symbol we have to show that we are supportive of that. Now, we could go in the Guinness Book of Records if we had the whole Washington, D.C. residents to come out on Emancipation Day for statehood. Because we can have the largest group of persons supporting that. And that could be a way that we can put our name out there. So we have to do something outstanding.
So does that put the burden of proof on us?
It puts the burden of proof on us, and it puts the burden of proof on the person who holds the purse strings. You can't do anything without money. So the budget and the folks who hold the money, that's why I'm turning over to Mr. Kinlow.
Okay, Mr. Kinlow.
Because I don't have a dime.
I got a couple nickels. But let me just reflect on just a couple things. You know, how did you get political change? Some people say it's either evolution, that you move from one point and then you ramp up, and some people say it's got to be about a revolution. But the fact of the matter is, we talk about America and these grand ideas, home of the brave, equality, etc., so forth. But my history books tell me that when this country was founded, the only people that could vote were what? You had to be white, male, and of a certain age, and a property owner. So there were always a lot of conditions to the game. So just understand, we're in a game and we've got to flip the script, and we've got to change the game. Now the game has changed over time, hasn't it?
It has.
So, because what happens when they said, well, you know, black people are 3/5 of a white person, and then we change the game moving forward 100 years later. Then you've got the civil rights efforts and giving women the right to vote. The GLBT community having full rights now is popular. It has only occurred in probably the last 10 years. 15, 20 years. The disabled community, making sure that they had access and they were not going to be discriminated against. Well, here in Washington, D.C., it's interesting. You know, we're discriminated not based on our color or our height or our orientation, but by where we live. And that's something that we're going to have to push out there and let people know. It is not right to treat people differently based on your sex, your orientation, your height, your color, anything. So why should it be okay to treat people differently based on where you live? So we're going to have to continue to let people know, one, that we're different, and people don't know. When you're in this area, you know, you travel from Maryland to DC to Virginia very easily, and it all looks the same. And you think everybody's the same, but there's a difference. So if in Washington, D.C., we have a vote and say, well, we want, say our citizens said they should have access, women should have access to health care and access to abortions, et cetera, so forth. And our citizens empowered our elected officials to make decisions, and that's the way we move. Well, then we support our elected officials, and that's what we do. Congress should not be able to come in, people who do not live here, who do not pay taxes, and tell us what to do with our own money and tell women what to do with their own bodies. We passed our laws a few years ago. There was a piece on marijuana saying, and you know, there's a number of states that have marijuana laws. I think Washington, California, Colorado, and I think there's probably about 6 or 7 other states in the queue getting ready to line up. They have voted and said it is okay to have marijuana and it's legal, you can tax it, you can have restaurants, bars, there are a lot of things you can do. Well, we passed something similar here in Washington, D.C., and all hell broke loose. Members of Congress came and said, oh no, you can't do that, that's morally wrong. But you didn't tell your next door neighbor in the next state that he couldn't do it. You're only telling it to us because we don't have any power on Capitol Hill. If we had the power, we could keep them off of us, but we don't have that. So we're constantly in a situation where we've got this great city, we've got a progressive city that has a certain, you know, we got a certain set of values in Washington, D.C. Look at this room. We're very diverse. We're very comfortable, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, senior, young, hanging out, going to the same places. And we've got to continue to fight.
Okay, Dr. Harrison.
Yeah, let me take issue with one thing. We do have power. We have lots of power. But we need a plan in order to perfect that power. All we need to do is take a page out of the civil rights movement. I'm from Louisiana, where blacks had black and white water fountains, where you couldn't go in the store and try on clothes, where you couldn't do this and you couldn't do that. But we got together and sat in the 1960s. And we changed the laws. We went to jail, however, but we changed the laws. And we overturned the laws throughout the state. So we do have power. We need to put the power into action. And we like to talk about it, but we don't like to roll up our sleeves and really do it. And this is a war. This is a war. You know, we don't have the red button that Trump has, but we have our own button. We have our own button.
Okay.
And we need to push the panic button.
Oh, let me reflect that. And it's interesting just to be able to say it, because a number of years ago, I was a part of a team that helped organize people to get arrested, to draw attention to the movement. Mike was there, I got arrested, a lot of people, and we got folk, you know, Mayor Bowser, before she was mayor, got arrested as a part of the movement that we were involved in. Kwame Brown, Vincent Gray, and we got Mary Shea, and those folk are on the council right now. And we got them involved in civic disobedience as kind of an homage to what happened back in the 60s. I mean, the civil rights movement was right with the sit-ins, the protests, the agitation. So we said, well, maybe we need to go back to our roots. And we tried it. And, you know, we figured people would follow the elected officials and you get a lot of people out, but people were not comfortable with going out. They're not comfortable with not paying their taxes as a protest. And we just really need to ramp it up so that folk really feel it so that they can react to it.
You see what a great question that was? Look at all the dialogue that followed that. Okay, can we have another member of the audience? We do have right here. Jay, please stand up, say your name. Take the mic, speak into the mic, please.
Hello everyone, my name is Keena Ross. A couple of years ago, I actually, for Summer Youth Employment, I did work with actually Senator Brown for DC Statehood. And for me, I actually, after the time progressed, I only heard about DC Statehood for maybe 3 times after that, when Eleanor Holmes presented the statue of Frederick Douglass. And actually in my United States government class in school and at the voting ballot, how can you Oh, sorry, excuse me. Do you think, because after I did my summer youth employment job, I wanted to be more active into the DC statehood after the next summers, but I never heard anything more about that. Do you think y'all could branch out a little bit more to the summer youth employment to bring out more attention? Because we actually had to do public service announcements and actually go around and ask people what is DC statehood. And we had to interview 35 people. And out of 35 people, maybe around the estimate of 5 people knew about DC statehood.
So can each of the panelists address, starting with the senator, how can people become more involved in the activities?
Well, we need to set up avenues for that to happen. I do remember that project very well, and it was a great project. Unfortunately, again, we need resources to make this happen. This was the idea behind our website, Teach Democracy, was that you had high school students, high school civics teachers are required to teach to certain standards. We link DC statehood to each one of the standards which is required to be taught by social studies teachers in high school in the attempt to bring more kids in. But yeah, we've got to find things for young people to do to get them involved here in Washington. And it's got to be more than just marching down to the White House, which we do occasionally, or these projects that we come up with here and there. There should be a sustained effort. There's nowhere, as Dr. Harris has already pointed out, we don't teach DC statehood. You've got 10 top universities in Washington, D.C., and none of them teach a course on DC statehood. Not at UDC, not at Howard, not at Georgetown, not at GW. I lecture in all these places, and there's not one course in any university in the District of Columbia on DC statehood. And we need to end that.
Okay, so there's not a course, but can you address some of the programs or possibilities that do exist that young people can get involved in the debate?
Well, I don't know very many that exist in Washington. There are little pockets of things happening. What really needs to happen, and Michael Brown just mentioned that, is that you need to get a group of persons together, draft up a curriculum of teaching DC statehood, and get it accepted through the mayor's office to the superintendent of education. You have to organize and develop it. I mean, we talk about it, but we got to put our pen to paper and make it happen. And when we develop that, then we shop it around and get it in the schools. And then we have a team of people who go out and speak on it. You know, to speak on and explain what all that means. But until we do that, we're just talking about it. But it's got to be an action plan.
Okay, we have another question from the audience. Oh, before you do.
You know, again, I think part of it is evolution. I went to Ballou High School a number of years ago. We did not have a DC history course as a part of the curriculum. And it only began probably, I want to say, probably about 15 years ago. Kathy Snyder-Smith and some other folk worked hard through ARE, Associate for Renewal in Education, to make sure that they presented a concept that now is a part of the DC high school curriculum. I mean, I think they started off at like the 3rd grade, but the subject matter was so developed that now it's like a 12th grade course. So, and that's really kind of recent history. But we can continue to do that, I think, at the colleges and universities. There are places for people to plug in. There are nonprofits that are involved in the movement. There's an organization called DC Vote. There's Statehood for Democracy. There is a group of students for statehood. I think originally there's a chapter, I think, in AU and Georgetown. I spoke to a group of students at Howard as well. There's always been some active students at UDC as well. The challenge is they're active for a year or two, and then you go ahead and you graduate and you move on to the next thing. The goal is to keep it embedded so it's always in front of folks. But so there are other organizations that people can get involved in. So if you go to some of those websites, dcvote.org, they'll probably lead you to a few organizations. Stand Up for Democracy. And the DC government website is statehood.dc.gov. So go to those websites and you'll find a few more resources to be able to plug in.
Okay, we'll take the question from the audience.
Dr. Ward, just before the question, I was going to offer HumanitiesDC would be willing.
Would you please speak in the mic? So
Okay, HumanitiesDC would be willing to work with a group of people who could come up with a curriculum. And I love the idea of developing it and working with it with summer youth employment program students, because you have a nice captive audience of very bright young people who I think would be willing to take that message further. So yeah, I'm offering to help, and we've got just the guy here, Jay Stewart, who is a historian.
And I'll be the liaison at
You can,
DC.
we got a plan, we got a plan.
We got a plan, no question of policy.
And I work with you on that.
That sounds
Okay.
fantastic. Y'all hear it here tonight. We've come up with an alternative plan on question of policy. Remember that, class? Okay, we have a question coming from the front.
My name is Nancy Collins, and my question was for Senator Brown. I heard you say that you had a radio station and that you don't have the funds. So if you don't have the funds, I feel like it's stagnated for the plan, you know, to come up. Like, I was thinking like, Howard has a radio station, WPGC 93, HUR, and that can get to the older group, like, you know, myself. And she said the younger group, but that'll help with them too. But I mean, how are you gonna make this happen if you don't have the finance? You say you only have like what, 900,000?
79,000.
79?
79,000.
Okay,
And I'll
thank
tell you, the reason, this is a good question, and the reason that we have an internet radio show, which we've had and we promoted, and we're excited that we have 8,000 listeners after 3 years. But the reason that we have an internet radio show is because it costs $40 a week. And for the first 2 years, I had to pay for it out of my own pocket because the District of Columbia gave me no funds whatsoever. I've been your senator for 10 years. I've only been funded for 2 years. The first 8 years, $50,000 came out of my kids' college money. You can see my wife wincing back there. $50,000 came out of their money because that's what we used to fuel the effort. So you're right. It would be great to get WHUR or WPGC or PBS or, you know, Kojo Nambi's NPR, somebody to do a show. But the reason we do it on the internet is it costs $40 a week, and that's what we can afford.
Great question. Do we have another question or comment from the audience?
I got a question.
Stand up, say your name, please speak directly into the mic.
How you doing? My name is Xavier Marshall. I'm actually originally from Chicago, but I'm in DC for over 10 years now. And my question is, what was the event that took place that I guess didn't give DC any type of representation? Was there an event that took place that carried this on for so many years? Like, what's going on?
Yeah,
So can our panelists briefly take us through the history starting with Dr. Harris? So can you take us on a short historical track from the beginning of when the Statehood Initiative came into play through today in about 3 minutes?
I don't know if I can get all of it, but in 1980 is when it really started.
Please speak into the
1980 was really the beginning of the statehood movement as we know it to be. That's when the delegates I mentioned were elected and a constitutional convention was convened and delegates penned a constitution which is called New Columbia, which was called New Columbia. That was the beginning. Nothing had been done prior to that. Okay, once that was done, Marion Barry in 1983 filed a petition for it to be presented to Congress, and it was done through Delegate Walter Fontroy in 1983, and the first hearing was 1984. Then in 1987, there was another convention, there was another constitution that was drafted. That was through the council and Walter Fontroy. And that one came about, but it didn't go anywhere. It also went to Congress, and Congress has, let me go back again. Congress was given the power by Article 3, I think, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution, to determine any new states that come into the Union. Okay? Before that time, you had the issue of slavery in this country, okay? And so when they were admitting states into the Union, they wanted to keep the balance of power. So if they admitted a state that was Democratic, then they wanted to admit a state that was Republican, to keep the balance of power between the North and the South, because that was a fight over slavery and over economic development. That fight has gone on through the century, the balance of power. Washington DC does not represent a balance of power because Puerto Rico is Democratic, DC is Democratic, Hawaii is Democratic, I think. And so you don't have the balance. Okay, so they're looking really, I should say, very curiously at all the Democratic states that want to come into the Union because it throws off the balance of power. And they want to keep the power. Okay?
You know, let me just say
So
that.
in 87, got that last constitution that was drafted was in 87. We haven't had one since then, but we've had Congressman Eleanor Holmes Norton has continuously sent our Constitution to Congress. And it has gone through, in fact, like right now, she and Mayor Bowser and Representative Tom Copper of the state of Delaware are marshaling what we have through the Congress. But it's not going anywhere because you have the Republicans in power. And so there's not going to be any letter to allow us to have a vote in Congress.
Well, I'm gonna take it back even further. And since we've got our professor here from Philadelphia, it ties to her home state.
Oh, yes, it does.
Now, the capital of the country, many, many years ago, the 1700s, was Philadelphia. And there was an event there where, the militia was owed money by the government. The government owed the military some money. And the folk in the military said, look, we're not going to take this. So they stormed the Capitol, which was in Philadelphia, and said, give us our money. And the government fled. And the government fled and said, okay, well, we need to set up a new form. We need to set up a new Capitol because these folk in Philadelphia are crazy. They are. No, they're all right. But when they moved, they decided to move and I think it was New Haven and New York. There were a couple other places, but when they decided on Washington, D.C., they created a whole new rule structure and said, never again. We're going to make sure that these folk will never do what they did to us in Philadelphia. I mean, because in Philadelphia, people had the right to vote. They had a member of Congress. They had access. And they changed the rules to such that we started being, well, actually, when we started in Washington, D.C., I think that we had the ability to vote for a member of Congress. We did. And then they took that back away from us, what was it, 1801 or 1801. And so it's been a long time. It's been such a long time that people forget that we ever had the right to vote. But if you had it one time, you could have it again. So, but our goal is to go beyond just that vote in the House, but to make sure we've got senators that we are a state because we have voted for it now. And it's clear that the residents of District of Columbia, by 86% in November, voted to move forward with the state of New Columbia. They changed the name a little bit, but that's what we are.
Senator Brown.
And that was the event, was what they referred to as the Philadelphia riot. They surrounded Carpenter's Hall with torches, scared the members of Congress. They ran to New Jersey. I don't know if you've ever been to New Jersey. That's my home state. It's a little scary over there. So when they came to Washington, Madison argued, we cannot have anybody be in control of us besides us. And that's when they decided to take our rights away. Because the Constitution says that they shall have the right to make all the laws in the District of Columbia. Exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever. But it doesn't say they have to take away our vote. They decided to do that because they were afraid, and the reason they were afraid is when the Congress called out the militia in Philadelphia, the governor said, oh, no. I'm not calling out people to shoot the people that I need to vote for me. You guys are on your own. And they fled, and they said, we can't have that again. We got to be in control. But that's changed, they're in control. None of us are going to attack the Capitol. We all make money of it.
Okay, we have another question from the audience. Sir, please stand, say your name, and speak directly into the mic.
Hello, my name is Rahul Sinha. I actually have a comment and then a question. Sorry, this is quite booming. Before I ask the question, to answer the previous the previous questioner, we lost our vote in the mid-19th century. It wasn't when we were created as a district. After that, for about 50 years, we could vote on this side of the river in Maryland, even though we were the district, and the south side of the river in Virginia. During retrocession, or just around that time, a new organic act was passed that took away that vote. But that's not my question. My question is, given that we have no power, and given that we are liberal, and the realities of politics, should we embrace retrocession? At least there we would have autonomy with a community that shares our values. We would have some representation in Congress, and the question would be settled. I mean, is there a path that has a remote chance at actual success that isn't what I've heard so far today, that leads to statehood in finite time, or should we just embrace returning to Maryland?
But you explain to the people what you mean by retrocession.
Retrocession would be me returning to Maryland as Alexandria returned to Virginia.
Well, and to answer your question, first of all, retrocession is a perfectly acceptable solution because it's statehood. It's just another form of statehood. We would go back to Maryland and become part of the state of Maryland, which was our original origin. The problem with statehood, the problem with retrocession, is that Maryland has to agree to it. Now, the Republican Party of Maryland is not going to be happy about getting 300,000 new Democrats. So they're going to stand up against it. Also, Washington, D.C. happens to would be immediately the largest city in Maryland. Maryland only has one urban center, and that's Baltimore. Baltimore's population is about 60,000 less than the District of Columbia. So we would immediately double the urban population of Maryland, and you could expect that people on the Eastern Shore or people in the rural areas would also stand up against them. Statehood, on the other hand, is the simplest remedy for us because it takes a simple majority vote of both houses of Congress and a signature by the president. So although retrocession, to answer your question, sir, is a perfectly acceptable form of government for us, it seems to, I think, at least where I come from, to be the harder path to take.
Yeah, I disagree wholeheartedly. I think retrocession is a cop-out. I think we need to find out what we need to do to bring statehood to the District of Columbia. We don't need to go to Maryland. And I think that that's a cop-out. That's just my opinion.
Okay, Mr. Kinlow.
And many are going to feel that way.
Well, for retrocession to occur, two things will have to happen. And they're two simple steps, but they appear somewhat impossible. And the first step is that residents of the District of Columbia would say that they want to go to Maryland. And that's not going to happen because the residents of the District of Columbia have already voted and said we want to be our own state. If that was ever on the ballot, people would not vote for it. There are no elected officials. None of our elected officials have embraced that at all. None of our mayors, they say, well, ask folk in Maryland and see what they want. Now, the challenge is we have not sufficiently taken this off the table and asked our friends in Maryland. But the second thing that would have to happen is people in Maryland would have to say, we want people from Washington, D.C. to come back. And as the senator mentioned, it would shift the paradigm, immediately. It would make, the city with the most money in the whole state of Maryland would be Washington, D.C. The city with the biggest media market will be Washington, D.C. And if you look at Baltimore politics, it's Baltimore politics, their largest city, where most of their governors have come from. So it's the city with the most money and the most power that is really the locus of control for the politics. And it would just shift it over here. So that's probably not going to happen. Tomorrow at the DC Emancipation Day breakfast, Senator Van Hollen will be there. And I think he's going to get that question. Where do you stand on retrocession? And we'll see. And we'll find out if there's any energy there. But I think that issue needs to be taken off the table.
Okay, we have another question here.
Hi, I'm Hayden McFadden. I just wanted to talk a little bit more about statehood and kind of what the fight, and how long of a fight it will be. It's kind of more of a marathon, you guys are saying with 79,000. It's not a lot of resources at all. What do other states like Alaska and Hawaii do to kind of expedite that process? Because instead of, we're going to just be trying to fight for statehood for 20, 30 years when that's not really a fight that, should be that long.
Well, that's a great question. I mean, one thing that Alaska did is they followed the Tennessee plan. They funded their delegation fully. They paid the people that worked in their delegation. They paid senators and representatives the equivalent of $76,000 in today's dollars. They also did a lot of creative things. When one of them, for example, we need to be more creative. One thing, for example, is that Alaska state flower is the forget-me-not. So when Eisenhower was on the fence about whether he would admit Alaska or not, sign legislation, they sent literally tons and tons of forget-me-nots to the White House. So many that they had to be removed by truckload. So they did a lot of creative things. But one thing they did was they stood behind the plan to make Alaska a state, and they also partnered with somebody. They partnered with Hawaii. And it's funny because the argument that they used against DC, they also used against Alaska, which is that Alaska would never elect a Republican. They would only elect Democrats. And Hawaii would never elect a Democrat. They would only elect Republicans. And if you know the history, Alaska has all Republicans except for one Democrat. And I can't remember if there's ever been a Republican from Hawaii. I think they're only elected Democrats. So those things change over time. But what they did was they were very aggressive. The citizens got involved. Probably the most effective thing they did, which I'd love to do, is they had a committee of 100 people that had an interest in Alaska. The wealthiest people in the country. People like Vanderbilt and, you know, these billionaires who are getting gold and oil and all sorts of other resources out of Alaska. And they said to them, you need to stand up to make Alaska a state, and they did. Think how many powerful people we have here in Washington. We've got a zillion of them. There was a guy that just lived in the White House who now lives in Colorado. We need to get people like Barack Obama and other people that are national leaders involved in our fight, because that's what Alaska didn't work very well.
Okay, we're going to take another question from the audience. We have one here, and then we'll go to the gentleman. Yes, you have to stand up, say your name, and speak directly to the mic.
Hello, my name is Aisha Shelton, and my question is for Dr. Hayes. What were the 4 tools that you have to?
The 4 twos.
That DC was too liberal.
Could you speak into the mic, please?
DC, the 4 twos that they said that characterized DC. We were too urban, too democratic, too liberal, and too black.
Okay, and I believe, yes, please piggyback.
Now, there have been folk like Senator Kennedy, he would call them the terrible twos, right? Because, you know, the terrible twos. Now, why do some of those things work against us? And we didn't really kind of feel or unpack that. Well, the thought is that if you are from rural communities, well, you know, the pie is only so big. So you're fighting for people who represent your interest. And if there are more people from the cities, well, that means less pie for you for the rural communities. So too urban, well, too black. Well, there seem to be a lot of racist people in this country. And if they saw a country that was going to elect a black vote, think about it. It was only 1964 that we had an opportunity to vote for President of the United States here in Washington, D.C. That's recent history. So there have been folk who've been disenfranchised for a long time, and a lot of people of color. So too black. Too liberal. Well, if you're conservative in the country, you're like, well, I need people to support my values, and I don't want to elect. And I mean, we're very liberal here in Washington, D.C. We're very progressive, and we're at the end of the scale. We're like mini San Francisco right here, or Washington, or Portland out here. So these things have worked against us because people know who we are, and they would not want to support them.
Okay, we'll take a
Can I
question.
just say one more thing to this young lady? You should know, too, that no state has ever entered the Union with a majority-minority population. So that's true. So it's very, very poignant that race has something to do with this. But you should also know that it doesn't tell all the story in DC, because the Washington, DC was not a majority black population until the 1960s. So that doesn't explain the first 150 years of denying this. So it's a factor today, but there are other factors.
Okay, now to our audience.
I truly enjoyed this. My name is Gerald Patrick. And,
Oh, that's Dr. Harris's husband.
my question, I'm getting all sort of,
Please speak into the mic, sir.
Brother Gillow said something about it, but why is it not possible to do a piecemeal approach? I own a home lost a ability, to be able to on the floor.
Right.
Now, we realize with this Congress and who's in charge, the probability of DC statehood advancing is very, very slim, I would imagine. Now, is it possible to think in terms of certain kind of piecemeal approaches to trying to get certain things? I don't know whether you have to go full haul in order to get it, but I do not believe that you're going to get it in the full haul thing. I just believe that there are certain things that maybe we can at least try to get her a place to be on the floor or be in a committee as a representative, instead of just going out and saying, this is what we have to do in order to get statehood.
Exactly, and I think that's what Dr. Harris, your wife, has been saying, that instead of talking about it, we got to be about it. And so from each of our panelists, if you had to offer up a piecemeal approach, could each of you give your view on what that would be? And let's start with Senator Brown.
Well, first of all,
you got to stop going first.
First of all, I hate to argue with anybody that was smart enough to get a beautiful woman like Dr. Harris to marry them. But I think that a piecemeal approach, we've tried that over and over again. We tried budget autonomy. We've tried getting one vote. We tried the Missouri plan. What you were talking about, what Eugene was just talking about, we tried to bring Utah in with DC, because DC is the most democratic place on the planet. 92% of us voted for Hillary Clinton. I'm not sure that 92% of her family voted for her. 92% is a really, really high mark. Even Eleanor was going to that at 92%. So we're very, very liberal here. And so we tried to bring in Utah, where they have one Democrat in all of Utah. But unfortunately, they stand against us because they see just what you said, Mr. Harris. It's kind of like if you get a little bit, they're going to want more. So they deny us even the little things like budget autonomy, giving Eleanor a vote. You know that Eleanor has a vote every time the Democrats are in control of the House. And then as soon as the Republicans get control of the House, the first thing they do is they take her vote away. These people in the Capitol are not benign. They don't like us, and they work actively against us. So I don't believe that an incremental approach will get us any further than going for the whole thing, which is statehood. I don't think that there's conditional equality, and I like to use the analogy of Rosa Parks. I say, would Rosa Parks have settled for sitting in the middle of the bus? No, you pay the same fare that everybody else pays, and you get to pick your seat. That's the way.
Okay, Dr. Harris.
Okay. I have a different thought about that. Number one, we have 5 different groups working on statehood in the District of Columbia. It might be more than that. It needs to be one strong group. One strong group that brings together ideas, money, support, volunteers, and stay on the mission. We don't need 5 groups. We're talking about statehood. That's one thing I think. The second thing is we must develop this curriculum, because we have to start it in no more than the 3rd grade. We can start in 2nd grade and begin to develop that curriculum on statehood. That every child talks about statehood. They write poetry about it. They rap about it. They write songs about it. It becomes, we live and breathe statehood. It's like it's in the Baptist church. We need to be baptized at statehood. And all 8 wards need to be a part of this movement. It needs to be a movement. And we all move in the same direction, not 5 different directions. And I think that makes a difference as to how we can pull together where we're going to go.
Okay, and finally, Mr. Kinlow.
All right, I think that's a very good question. And that has been the one question that the movement has been involved in for about the last dozen years. I mean, really involved. Are we gonna take this thing on piecemeal? Are we gonna get what we can get? Or are we gonna go for the whole banana? Are we gonna go for the Hail Mary, or are we trying to get 3 points? You going for 7 or you going for 3 points? And at this point in the game, I think it's just about trying to score. Let's just move forward. As they used to say back in the movement, I guess in the 50s, before I was born, forward ever, backwards never. We just need to be, whatever opportunity that is in front of us, we need to be able to take it. I think that we should not stop our statehood train. I mean, that's there, we have voted for it, let's work for it, let's advance it. But just because we've all said we want statehood, I'm not gonna fight if somebody says, well, what about floor privileges for the Congresswoman? Is that too small for us to work on? No, it's not too small. It's moving in the right direction. It's an evolution that gets us closer and closer to where we need to be.
Okay, have you had a good time tonight? Yeah. But make some noise if you had a good time tonight. I'm glad you had a great time. And Dr. Harris called for poetry and rap songs and all of that about statehood. So as usual, I'm going to conclude tonight with a poem at your request called New Columbia and Statehood. You know they could, but do you wish they would relieve the district's position of limbo and grant it statehood? From its framing by the United States Constitution, governed by Congress's plenary power, efforts to achieve greater political and electoral rights has been the discussion of this hour. Not quite a territory and not quite a state. Since the early 1800s throughout the day, the governance of the District of Columbia has been an ongoing debate. And yes, change has been made from rule by commissioners to the election of its leadership. Residents of the District of Columbia haven't got a receipt for the price they paid because it is not autonomous and we are still under congressional oversight. And we are not considered in the discussions of the proponents of the theory of states' rights. It's a never-ending battle and a never-yielding fight. This concludes tonight's Humanitini, and to all, a good night.